Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. My name is James Batchelor and today we are speaking with Manheim. This year the firm is 100 years old, and joining me to chat more about this is Manheim Auction Services Managing Director Liam Quegan. Liam, hello.
Hi James, good to see you, and thanks for having us today as we celebrate this momentous achievement.
No, it's lovely to have you on, and thanks for speaking to us at this very special time. Forgive me, Liam, and I'm going to reveal my ignorance here, and I'm slightly ashamed to admit it, I have to say, but I had no idea Manheim's history dated back quite so far. So, and I'm sure there'll be other people who may be in the same boat as me. So just take us back to the early 1920s and just give us a bit of an overview of how it all began.
Yeah, I mean, and neither of us can remember that far, as can no one in our business. But I have to say, there's a really great story to be told here. So back in 1921, and obviously the world was very different there. In fact, the car had barely come into fruition. But back in 1921, in central Leeds, an auction house opened that sold a number of things. It sold bric-a-brac, it sold horses. But most importantly for our history, it was one of the first auction sites to sell vehicles. Started by two guys who were originally from Doncaster. They set up an auction house in Leeds. And a number of sort of other auction houses existed at that time. But we could trace our way all the way back there as a Manheim business. Admittedly, it wasn't called Manheim at the time. Time went on, and then in 1946, in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, the first purpose-built car auction house in Europe opened in Rothwell, just outside Leeds. Rothwell is where our head office still remains. And at the time, and it feels very strange now when you visit that site, at the time it was seen as a real risk because that business was opened in the outskirts of Leeds, which now feels very, there's lots of houses and so on around there. Well, back in the day, there wasn't. And most importantly of all, at the time, the M1 didn't exist either. So it was seen as a real risk. Then suddenly the M1 was built, and as you may say, the rest is history. So yeah, we do go back quite a long way, and I've got some other kind of tidbits for you in terms of our growth from 1921 and then the mid-40s going forward. But yeah, we can go all the way back.
Yeah, well, I suppose the 1940s, that must have been the era where everything started to get a bit more professional, because, you say the company dates back to the 20s. Well, then cars were a rich commodity, weren't they?
Absolutely.
And so I would imagine between the 20s and the 40s, if a dealer wanted to stock their forecourt, it would be down to word of mouth and bartering on the street. So yeah, the idea of an auction house really did it was the starting point for something becoming professional like we know it today.
Exactly. I mean, you have to remember, most auction houses back in the pre-war years were actually selling animals and, those kind of things. It was much more of a kind of rural society. It was a very different approach. So it was really only in the post-war years, and actually when one of the families involved in the auctions at that time, the Myers family, really started to grow what would become kind of central motor auctions, which would ultimately become Manheim. We're starting to grow that business, and through the 60s and 70s, and what we saw from that Rothwell site was the expansion of the business. We started to grow more sites, including several that we still have today. So along with Rothwell, which we currently have as our Leeds auction site, sites like our site in Gloucester and our site in Shepshed were built. And a number of other sites that have been and gone were also acquired and so on. So what you started to see through the 60s and 70s was really this kind of expansion of automotive auctions. And that was happening both within our business, but also more generally, both within the UK and globally. What we then started to see was Eric Myers, who ran that business at the time, who was a real innovator. And one of the stories that we'll talk about today is about innovation, started to see opportunities to do things differently. And, it feels now, when I've just driven down the M1 myself, now I'm in our Northampton site today, and you see the ubiquitous car transporters on the motorway. Well, Eric was one of the pioneers of these kind of idea of multi-deck transporters and this kind of idea of, being able to transport vehicles in a more efficient way. almost to the point where he was, as I say, an early pioneer who set up a business entirely around transport in addition to his auction business. So the kind of culture of innovation that he brought has really helped us grow as a business and so on.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there aren't many businesses in the automotive suppliers sector that can say they're 100 years old, especially in the remarketing sector. And for a company to be around for that length of time, it needs to have been innovating. So, I mean, you touched upon it there, but what have been the key innovations, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a number of just signs of us being brave as a company to do things differently. I think one of the other stories that starts to come together in the kind of late 70s and onwards is there was a separate auction business, Bristol and West Auctions, that became independent car auctions, and John Bailey, who's very affiliated with our business over a long time, who was the leader of that business at the time, he was a true innovator. And probably the biggest innovation that he brought into the auction business as we started to merge, as those two businesses started to merge, was the idea of something called auction vision. So historically, of course, auctions were, as we still sometimes experience today, kind of people in auction halls bidding on vehicles. But John saw the opportunity for a kind of precursor to the online auction. So he developed this idea of auction vision, and I love this innovation. So this was genuinely in the kind of, not necessarily early stages of television by any stretch of the imagination, but starting to develop the idea that we could televise auctions and take bids both from people within the site but also over the phone. So at the time it was over the phone. So we'd televise an auction, he'd have a bank of people taking phone calls from potential bidders, and even have a van outside the auction with a big satellite dish on. And that was his innovation, and a critical one, and really was a precursor to where we see now a huge amount of digital auctioneering happening. And it was that innovation which John then took to the US, and he went over to visit a US business, which Manheim at the time, part of Cox Enterprises, Manheim was in the US only. So he went over to the US and he said, look, I've got this thing, auction vision. The US business thought this is cool. And then he supported John in merging his business with Central Motor Auctions. And that's when, in the late or mid 90s, really, Manheim in the UK, as we know it now, was born. So it's a kind of real proof point of when you do something that's really different. No one else was doing auction vision in the market at the time. You can actually, you can break the market open, and that's what he did. So we can trace ourselves back to that point as a point when we massively changed our direction. So, we've got other innovations as well, but that feels like a critical one.
I mean, as innovations go, that's pretty big, isn't it? And it really did sort of preview an online future, which of course, which everyone's become acquainted to over the past 12 months. But the basis of the business is still cars being sold physically as well. But I mean, it's just amazing to see how online has really taken quite a long time to actually establish, hasn't it? Yeah. And it's become a key part of the business, of course, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we obviously have the COVID years, but even before that, we were starting to really, see things change. The business continued to evolve once we merged and became Manheim. We started to do other things like bring in assurance products. We had something called Manheim Certified Assurance, which became SureCheck, which is, kind of industry first. We started to branch out into other parts of our business. So we brought in an inspections business in the early 2000s. We brought in Simulcast, and Simulcast is our version of kind of online auctioneering in 2004. So you're right, 1996, we launched Auction Vision. It's another 8 years till we have a web-based version of that, and it was a very basic web version of it, and that's nearly 20 years ago. So you're absolutely right, it's taken some time, but I think the most important thing for us is, whilst we need to be innovative, we also need to listen to our customers as well. I think the bedrock for a long time of auctions, of automotive auctions, has been that physical presence, seeing vehicles, touching them, and so on. And it's taken a number of things to happen. Firstly, launching things like Simulcast and people adopting that and so on, but also dealers changing their business models. Some dealers becoming more web-based, less likely to visit auction sites. We kind of got ourselves through to 2020, with the industry sort of slowly evolving. And then, of course, what happens, as we all know, in March 2020 is we get the huge global shock of the crisis that we're still emerging from, and having those bedrocks of innovation, having that digital platform was utterly crucial for us and for our kind of peers in the market as well, because without it, we wouldn't have been able to supply our customers in the way that we've been able to. So it's been a real, it's one of those things that it may have been slow moving for a time, but my God, it was critical when we needed it. And I think we can learn a lot from that. So yeah, it's really, really interesting kind of flow of events through that 100 years or so.
Yeah. And one thing which customers and dealers have seen, particularly over the past 12 months, is the idea of buying and selling things entirely through trust, because people haven't been able to see cars physically. They've had to rely upon by what they see and by what they hear. And of course, Manheim has always been at the forefront of that, of being trustworthy and helping dealers buy really great stock, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, integrity is critical to us. I mean, we're part of a family-run business. It's in the top 100 largest privately owned businesses in the world. They very much think of it long term, and integrity is critical to them. So, the Cox family in Atlanta, and through COVID, have been critical in terms of sort of setting our course as we've gone through COVID and managed through that, about doing things the right way. They were like that before, but it's really shown up in this critical period. You're absolutely right for us, and kind of being able to deliver a trustworthy service with people buying products that they believe do what they say, has been crucial. But it's also been a challenge through COVID, as you mentioned, not being able to have, our customers in sites, has meant that certainly for certain parts of what we sell, the lower grade, lower cost vehicles that have lived a life, shall we say, actually being able to see that kind of product and trust what you're buying online has been at times challenging. But I do think what we've tried really, really hard to do is to be fair. And, and also, I think our reputation precedes us, like you mentioned, of kind of that kind of idea of we don't want anyone to buy a product from us and be disappointed by it. We want to make sure they know what they're buying. When it's come down to digital auctioneering, it's about better inspection reports, it's about better imagery and all that sort of stuff, but also behind the scenes, the kind of policies we have in place when people aren't happy. And I feel really proud about how we've dealt with many of those things. But we recognize that, there's also a future, and how we think about that will be critical.
Well, yeah, that's a good segue, really, because my next question was going to be, we've spoken about auction vision and how innovative that was. I mean, what are your predictions as to the future of remarketing, say over the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, I think the pace of change, and it's a bit of a cliche, really, the pace of change will never be as slow again as it is right now, is the cliche. We will get faster and faster and faster. And what we're seeing at the moment is, I don't think we've seen all the effects of the COVID crisis yet. I think what we've seen is the need to manage a massive change of events quickly, and many of us in our industry have done that, and I think actually in general industry's done it really well. But we're definitely seeing further effects down the line. I don't think people would have predicted at the start of the crisis the impact on new car production. I don't think people would have got a kind of perfect version of what digital auctioneering looks like now. What I do think, though, if you ask for my predictions, is I think we'll see much more kind of multi-channel auctioneering. So I think whilst digital has been there pre-COVID, now it will become the dominant force for many of the product that's bought through auctions. But there'll also be a place for physical. I think it would be completely wrong to suggest that doesn't have a place for, as I say, particularly the older, lower grade vehicles, where we sell many, many tens of thousands of those cars every year. And they're a critical part of what our independent customers in particular, sell to retail customers. So we believe that is likely to remain part of the story, but probably a much smaller part of the story than it was prior to COVID. But as you also know, and it's certainly in the short term, whilst new car remains as it is, we'll see different business models for franchise dealer groups. We'll see different models for car supermarkets. We'll see different ways of sourcing stock. And I don't think life will ever go back to what it was like before. And I don't think it should. I think people will have learned a lot. We've learned so much more about how to use multiple channels. We're starting to use dealer auction, a partner business of ours, to sell vehicles upstream. Historically that we would auction in timed auctions, we're beginning to test how we can do things upstream to allow more of an eBay style auction to happen for those kind of vehicles. And lots of different, what I think we'll actually see is lots of innovations across our market, some of which will stick and some of which will, might flame out. But actually, I think what we have to see is that for the good of our customers and for the good of retail customers as well, we see the whole gamut of our industry try to do things differently, because now is a brilliant time to try and do it as well. So, I feel very excited about where we're at. And I feel like we've got a good innovative company around me to try and deliver on it. But I also recognize the fact that not everything will work quite as we want it to, because that's the nature of innovation, isn't it? Some things will go well, some things won't. But I feel very excited about the opportunity to deliver for our customers in different ways to what we did prior to COVID.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear. And it's also, brilliant to hear how, forward thinking you are, but you also need to stand back and sort of celebrate 100 years, because it's, a centenary is, not many companies can celebrate those. Just tell us a little bit about the plans the business has in store to celebrate, and how people can keep up to date with the celebrations.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great thing to recognise the 100-year thing, and we've got a number of our team members have been here for many decades actually, which is a great sign of the sort of business that we are. But it's also been, I'm not going to lie, it's been a bit of a strange time to celebrate something like it. You have this kind of global crisis going on. Our industry is going through quite a lot of stress and change as well. I think the kind of first thing we've done, and I'm really proud of this actually, we focused a lot on charity. So our nominated charity for the year is the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which delivers, great opportunities for very poorly children to experience things that they want to do at very difficult times of their life. So our team members have been really focused on actually raising charitable donations for Make-A-Wish, and we're in the 20,000 plus pounds worth of raising money for that foundation. And there's been lots of kind of, exercise things going on, cake baking, lots of different things, and it's been great. And actually, I think that was almost the first thing we said we'd do, give back a little bit. And there's a lot about the Cox family, about giving back to society as well. Obviously, though, we also do want to recognise it for our team members as well. So we've had a number of celebrations going on. We've had, and we'll continue to do that through the year. So we've got multiple set of events. We have to obviously be very careful about COVID at the moment. So it's not right yet. Right now, it's not events that happen with a big garden party or anything like that yet. But we're getting there. Hopefully, it's been more about promoting, kind of what our business is about and celebrating the achievements of people within our business who've been around for a lot of that history. In terms of keeping up on what we're doing, obviously it's all over our website, and we've rebranded all of our Manheim branding to reflect the 100 years for this year, and across all of our social as well. So on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and so on. So you can keep in touch with that. But I think the main thing is just to recognize that it's fantastic that we have the legacy and the credibility of being a business around for 100 years in our industry. But really, this is about looking forward. Celebrate the fact we've made 100 years happen, but also the next 10, 15 years will show, kind of significant change in our industry, and how we go through that with the great people that we have, and frankly, within the great industry that we operate, is really what we're about. So yeah, it's exciting. And, it's good to be able to get here, but looking forward is probably more important to me than looking back.
Yeah, well, it may not be the best time to celebrate 100 years, but at least you're making time for some cake, and that is the most important thing, isn't it?
I always make time for cake.
Yes, you and me both, unfortunately. But anyway, Liam, we've run out of time today, but thank you so much for coming on. Fascinating to hear so much about the business. I've come away pretty learned myself now, and keep in touch with the celebrations, and have a good rest of the year. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for today's Car Dealer Live. Join us again very soon. Bye-bye.